The colony world was small, far from the center of the galaxy and often forgotten. Its forests glowed faintly at night under a sky filled with strange constellations, and its oceans shimmered with colors that no human eye could fully describe. People lived quietly there, tending their fields, teaching their children, and building communities where everyone looked out for one another. They were peaceful beings, with no armies and no interest in politics beyond their own borders. Yet, they had something the galaxy wanted, something others were willing to take by force. The first attacks were sudden. Bright flashes tore through the night sky as ships descended from orbit, their weapons firing without warning. Entire towns disappeared in hours, and the colonists had no way to fight back. Panic spread like wildfire. Families ran into forests and caves, hoping the invaders would not find them. The skies, once calm and beautiful, were now filled with smoke and fire. The once serene planet had become a battlefield overnight, and no one was coming to help. News of the attacks traveled quickly through the galaxy, carried by data streams and broadcasts that no government could fully control. But the response was chillingly calm, or rather, it was silence. The Galactic Council, the governing body that oversaw interstellar relations, had made their decision. They would not intervene. They claimed neutrality, as if that word could ever shield those under attack. Observation drones circled the planet, recording the destruction, but no rescue missions were sent. No fleets arrived to fight the invaders. The Council's diplomats spoke carefully in their chambers, sending messages of concern that did nothing but delay any real help. From Earth, the reports were received with disbelief. People watched the live streams of burning cities, of terrified families running through strange alien landscapes, and of children crying in the darkness. There was a deep, almost painful sense of familiarity. Humanity had witnessed similar horrors on its own world long ago, and many could not understand how the galaxy could remain so cold in the face of suffering. Protests erupted across continents. People gathered in squares, in front of embassies, in the streets, holding signs and shouting. Into the air, they demanded action. They demanded that anyone, stand up for the helpless. At the same time, there were those in Earth's governments and defense networks who understood that the rules were strict. Intervening could be seen as a violation of galactic law. Earth had made a promise, an official agreement, not to interfere in conflicts outside its immediate jurisdiction. That promise weighed heavily on leaders in sleek, sterile command rooms. Screens glowed with images from the colony world, each one more heartbreaking than the last. Some leaders looked away, unwilling to face the human cost of inaction. Others clenched their fists, torn between duty and conscience. And yet, while official voices spoke of restraint, the quiet truth was different. Among humans, there was no universal agreement that the right thing to do was to stay silent. Soldiers, engineers, and ordinary citizens began to talk in whispers and encrypted messages. They spoke of the moral choice, of what it meant to witness suffering and do nothing. The discussions were careful at first, coded and hidden, but they grew bolder over time. People shared ideas about sending aid, of using old fleets, of mobilizing in secret. These were not reckless fantasies. They were plans based on knowledge, on preparation, on the understanding that humanity had resources that the rest of the galaxy often underestimated. Families in quiet neighborhoods spoke of the horrors on the alien planet over dinner tables. Children asked questions about why no one was helping, and parents struggled to find answers. In classrooms, teachers paused lessons to discuss empathy and responsibility, knowing that the future of humanity was shaped not just by technology or strategy, but by the willingness to act when it mattered most. Across cities and villages, a sense of shared purpose began to emerge. People who had never met felt connected by a single idea. No one should have to face such terror alone. Meanwhile, the colony world continued to burn. The invaders showed no mercy, and the alien colonists had no means to fight back. Fields were scorched, homes destroyed, and communities scattered. Children ran barefoot across plains of fire, guided by adults who had no weapons, only hope and determination. Every day, more lives were lost, and the question of intervention grew more urgent. Reports detailed the scale of the devastation, counting the destroyed towns, the hospitals bombed, and the families who had vanished. And still, the rest of the galaxy watched without moving. On Earth, this indifference fueled both outrage and resolve. People who had once focused on personal lives, on work, on routine, began to shift their attention. Conversations at workplaces, in cafes, and online forums turned toward what could be done. Engineers discussed hidden ways to move ships. Veterans shared strategies that had worked in past conflicts. Scientists analyzed the enemy's tactics, their fleet designs, and their weaknesses. There was a quiet sense that humanity had to prepare, not because the galaxy demanded it, but because morality demanded it. Humanity had learned the cost of inaction before. In history books, stories of silence in the face of atrocities were written, with bitterness. Children were taught the lessons of history, not as abstract facts, but as warnings. And now, watching the distant planet, many felt history repeating itself. There was a growing understanding that restraint, in this case, might mean complicity. To do nothing was a choice, and it was one that weighed heavily on the collective conscience of Earth. In hidden command rooms, away from public eyes, discussions began in earnest. Plans were sketched on digital screens, maps showing the location of the colony, the positions of the invaders, and the fastest routes through space. Everyone involved knew the risks. Acting without permission could bring sanctions, conflicts with the Council, and even accusations of war crimes. Yet the moral urgency outweighed the fear of bureaucracy. Humanity had always been underestimated, and now quietly, individuals prepared to prove that underestimation wrong. Even as preparations were made, life went on in quieter ways. People wrote messages of hope to be sent to the colony world, imagining that somehow the aliens might receive them. Communities organized aid for refugees who had escaped the attacks. Doctors studied alien biology, learning how to help the wounded. Every small act, every choice to prepare, became a thread in a larger tapestry of intention. Humanity was waking up to the reality that inaction was no longer an option. The colony world, meanwhile, showed resilience in the face of despair. Families hid together, creating small shelters and secret passages in forests and mountains. Children learned to run silently to navigate dangerous landscapes. Communities relied on ingenuity, creating traps, diversions, and warning systems. They did not know that Earth was watching, but somehow that unseen gaze gave a faint glimmer of hope. Somewhere out there, someone cared enough to notice, and so the stage was set. Across the stars, no fleet had yet moved to intervene. The invaders continued their campaign, believing themselves unchallenged. But on Earth, quiet decisions, moral awakenings, and careful preparations were unfolding. Human minds and hearts, connected by conscience and courage, began to move as one. No one knew exactly what would happen next, but the message was clear. Humanity was paying attention, and when the time came, they would act. The tension in the air was almost tangible. In homes, offices, and secret meeting rooms, people held their breath, waiting, preparing, hoping. The weight of history pressed down, reminding them of past mistakes, but also of the strength that came from standing up for what was right. No one on the colony world knew it yet, and no one in the galaxy anticipated it, but humanity's watchful eye was on the horizon. The first part of the story, the silent observation, was ending. A new chapter was about to begin, one that would test courage, morality, and the limits of human resolve. The world watched, the colony suffered, and the galaxy waited. And somewhere, in the hearts of humans, a quiet promise took root. No one would face this terror alone. Even if the rules forbade interference, even if the Council looked the other way, humanity would not stand idle. The first part of the story closed with smoke rising from burning towns and distant eyes across light years silently taking note. The future was uncertain, danger was real, and hope was fragile. But it existed, burning quietly, ready to ignite into something no one would ever forget. The images from the colony world reached Earth like a storm. Bright screens in homes, offices, and public squares showed cities reduced to rubble, rivers of smoke, and terrified families running for their lives. People could not look away. Some turned their faces, covering their eyes, but the sounds of panic, the screams, and the pleas for help echoed through their minds. Across nations, humanity felt a shared sense of outrage. How could the galaxy remain silent while innocent lives were destroyed? How could they stay away, calling it neutrality when lives hung by a fragile thread? Protests erupted almost immediately. People filled streets and cities all over the world. They carried banners with simple messages, "Stop the killing," or "Someone must act." People did not care about politics or which government could act first. They only knew that someone somewhere had to help. Even in remote villages and towns, people gathered in squares and town halls, speaking in hushed tones about the horrors they had seen. Children asked questions that adults struggled to answer. Why is no one helping them? Why do they let people die? Every person felt the weight of the situation, and every heart carried a quiet determination that something had to change. Meanwhile, Earth's official leaders faced a terrible dilemma. By law and by treaty, they were not allowed to intervene in conflicts outside the solar system. The Galactic Council had made this very clear. Humanity had promised neutrality, and breaking that promise could lead to sanctions, war, or worse. In sterile command rooms with walls covered in glowing maps of stars and fleet positions, officials debated the situation. Some argued for strict adherence to the rules. "We cannot act," they said. "The risks are too high. Intervention could escalate into a full-scale galactic conflict." Others shook their heads in quiet frustration, unwilling to stand by and do nothing while millions of lives were lost. Even as leaders debated, there were those who refused to wait for permission. Among the engineers, scientists, and veterans who had worked on Earth's defense systems, conversations began to change tone. It started in whispers, encrypted messages that traveled quickly through secure channels. They discussed what was possible. They analyzed old defense fleets, calculating the time it would take to launch ships to reach the colony world and to provide aid. They spoke of supplies, of medicine, of rescue operations, and even of tactics to neutralize the invaders. Unlike the Council, these people did not wait for approval. They moved quietly, guided by conscience rather than politics. The debate among Earth's people reflected a deeper struggle, one that had been part of humanity for centuries. On one side was fear, the fear of breaking rules, of punishment, of failure. On the other side was the unyielding need to do what was right. For some, that need outweighed everything else. It was not about glory or recognition. It was about lives, about families being torn apart, about children running barefoot through forests filled with fire. Humanity had seen horrors before on its own world. They had learned that neutrality in the face of injustice was not a moral option. And so quietly, determination began to take root. Families across Earth felt the weight of the news personally. Parents whispered to children, trying to explain why people were dying so far away. Teachers paused lessons to talk about empathy, courage, and responsibility. Communities organized in ways that had little to do with politics. Engineers and hobbyists tinkered with ships and devices, imagining ways to help. Volunteers studied alien biology and the medical needs of the colony's inhabitants. In homes, in classrooms, in quiet cafes, people discussed what could be done. Humanity was awakening to the understanding that action was necessary, even if the official authorities had chosen inaction. At the same time, the situation on the colony world grew darker. The invaders became more ruthless as resistance proved futile. Families were forced to abandon their homes. Children hid in caves and forests, guided by parents who had no weapons, only hope and courage. Entire towns were erased in a matter of hours. Desperation hung in the air like thick smoke. Yet, even in the darkness, the colonists found ways to survive. They built hidden shelters, passed messages in secret, and helped each other whenever possible. Every small act of survival became a statement of defiance. Even though no fleet came to save them, they refused to give up entirely. This quiet defiance on the colony world did not go unnoticed on Earth. Analysts, watching from afar, began to see patterns in the way the colonists moved, how they hid, and how they protected their communities. It gave hope that if help came, many lives could be saved. Conversations that began in secrecy started to gain momentum. Teams of veterans and engineers began working in shifts, preparing old ships that had been stored for decades. Communication networks were tested. Provisions were readied. Every person involved understood that they were taking a risk, that this was not just a mission but a moral responsibility. Even ordinary citizens contributed in ways that did not involve spaceships. Supplies, medicine, and equipment were gathered. People trained to help in rescue operations. Communities organized shelters for refugees who might arrive if the situation worsened. Across the globe, humanity began to move as one quietly, carefully, but decisively. No official sanction had been given, yet action was unavoidable. The quiet moral pressure of knowing what was right had become unstoppable. Back on the colony world, every day brought new horrors. People ran through forests under fire, found strangers who needed help, and hid from enemies who could strike without warning. Some adults organized children into small groups, teaching them how to stay silent and survive. In the cities, families abandoned homes and searched for shelters. In moments of quiet, when hiding in caves or under rubble, they whispered prayers, hoping someone somewhere might intervene. Every lost life, every destroyed building, every terrified child added urgency to the question, who would help them? Earth's hidden preparation continued in parallel. Teams of scientists, strategists, and engineers ran simulations late into the night, testing every possible scenario. Would the ships reach the colony in time? Could they fight off the invaders if necessary? Could they provide aid without sparking an intergalactic war? Every calculation, every plan was filled with uncertainty. But the humans doing this work refused to let uncertainty paralyze them. They were driven not by rules, not by politics, but by compassion. This was no longer about treaties or neutrality. This was about doing what was right, no matter the consequences. The world outside these command rooms and secret gatherings was beginning to feel the weight of possibility. News channels, social media, and forums were filled with debate. Some people argued that action would bring disaster. Others insisted that inaction was a moral failure. Families shared stories of courage and compassion, and ordinary citizens felt part of something larger than themselves. Across Earth, the moral question had turned into a quiet movement. Humanity could no longer just watch from afar. Meanwhile, the invaders on the colony world grew bold, believing no one would challenge them. They attacked indiscriminately, assuming that the lack of visible response meant consent. Cities were burned, forests torched, and families scattered. Yet in the midst of this, human observers on Earth took note of the colonists' ingenuity and resilience. Their courage in the face of overwhelming odds inspired those planning Earth's response. It was not just about technology or firepower. It was about understanding and valuing life, protecting the innocent and refusing to allow cruelty to go unchecked. As the hours turned into days, the moral imperative grew stronger. Humans debated late into the night, planning quietly, sharing ideas, and preparing for the impossible. They had no official orders, no clear permission, but they knew that doing nothing was not an option. Every report from the colony world fueled the determination. Humanity was watching. Humanity was preparing. Humanity was ready. Even in ordinary homes, people made quiet promises. Parents whispered to children about helping those in need, about standing up even when it is difficult, about moral responsibility. People donated supplies, practiced emergency procedures, and trained for unknown challenges. Communities organized quietly, in ways that would not attract attention but would allow them to act if necessary. Across the world, a silent network of readiness was forming, built not on politics but on conscience, not on rules but on humanity. The colony world continued to burn, and the invaders continued their relentless campaign. But on Earth, the first signs of something extraordinary were emerging. Hidden plans, careful preparations, and quiet determination coalesced into a force that no one could predict. The moral awakening, the decision to act despite rules and treaties, was taking shape. Humans had learned from their own history that standing by while others suffered was unacceptable. They were ready to intervene even if no one expected it. The second part of the story closed with tension and anticipation. The colony world was still in danger. Lives were still at risk. The invaders believed no help was coming. And yet, across light years of space, humanity was quietly preparing. Soldiers, engineers, scientists, and ordinary citizens were working together, driven not by orders but by conscience. The stage was set for a moral choice that would change everything. Humanity had decided they would act, they would intervene, and nothing. Across the solar system, a quiet awakening was underway. Humanity's old warships, vessels that had long been mothballed after past conflicts, were slowly coming back to life. In huge hangars, engineers worked tirelessly, their hands moving over controls and panels with precision, bringing ships online that had not seen space for decades. Lights blinked on consoles, engines hummed, and slowly, the ships began to stir as if waking from a long slumber. The air was thick with anticipation and a strange mix of tension and hope. Every person working on the fleet understood the gravity of what they were about to do. They were preparing to act when no one else would, and the responsibility weighed heavily on every heart. The Black Fleet, as it would come to be known, was not officially sanctioned. It had no flags, no markings, and no clear command from Earth's official government. It was humanity acting from conscience, not law. Veterans who had once fought in distant conflicts walked the decks, inspecting every weapon, every system, every mechanism. Scientists monitored engines and life support systems, ensuring that everything would work perfectly in space. Young engineers, who had only studied these ships in simulations or history books, learned quickly under the guidance of those who had experience. Every person contributed in their own way, understanding that the mission was larger than themselves. At the same time, training was underway. Crews practiced maneuvers, coordinated simulations, and ran drills to prepare for every possible scenario. They studied the enemy, analyzing their tactics and weapons from the reports received from the colony world. They learned the weaknesses and patterns of the invaders and discussed strategies to protect civilians while minimizing risks. In every room, on every ship, there was a sense of urgency. Time was running out for the colony, and every moment of preparation counted. The stakes were immense, but so was the sense of purpose. Families and ordinary citizens contributed as well, though in quieter ways. Supplies, food, and medical equipment were gathered and loaded onto the ships. Volunteers trained in emergency procedures, ready to assist in rescue operations. Communities across Earth coordinated support, understanding that even small actions could make a difference. Messages of encouragement and solidarity were sent to the crew, reminding them that they were not alone, that the hopes of millions rested on their shoulders. The quiet support of humanity gave the Black Fleet a sense of moral strength that no weapon could provide. While all this preparation unfolded, life on the colony world became even more desperate. The invaders were relentless, believing that no challenge would come. Families hid in forests, caves, and makeshift shelters, moving silently to avoid detection. Children learned quickly to stay hidden, to recognize danger, and to trust the guidance of adults who risked everything to protect them. Entire communities moved under cover of darkness, whispering plans and warnings to each other. Even in the face of despair, the colonists found strength in unity, supporting each other in ways that showed remarkable courage. Back on Earth, the decision to act without official sanction was not taken lightly. Leaders in hidden command rooms understood the risks. If the Black Fleet were discovered before reaching the colony, Earth could face diplomatic backlash, sanctions, or even attack from other galactic powers. But every person involved agreed that morality outweighed politics. Lives were at stake, and humanity could no longer remain silent. It was a difficult choice, but the quiet determination of engineers, scientists, and volunteers created a force that was ready to move, a force driven by conscience, not law. As the ships began to leave their hangars, the scale of the operation became clear. Hundreds of vessels, each filled with trained crew, supplies, and equipment, moved toward the launch points. Engines roared to life, lifting the ships into orbit, where they joined others waiting in formation. The sight was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. To those watching from Earth, it looked like a silent armada of hope, moving through space with a single purpose. Every person on board felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that their actions could change the course of history. Communication across the fleet was precise and disciplined. Teams coordinated maneuvers, sharing updates on status, position, and strategy. Commanders worked tirelessly to ensure that every ship was aligned with the larger mission, that no mistakes would jeopardize the lives of the colonists they were racing to save. The discipline and unity were remarkable, but underlying it all was a sense of humanity, of people acting to protect others simply because it was the right thing to do. The fleet moved not as machines but as humans guided by conscience and courage. The journey to the colony world was long, and each moment brought new challenges. Engineers monitored engines, making adjustments to keep the fleet on course. Crews practiced emergency drills in case of unexpected encounters with enemy ships. Scientists and strategists analyzed incoming data, updating plans and preparing for the unpredictable. Despite the tension, there was a quiet camaraderie among the crews. They shared stories, jokes, and small acts of kindness to maintain morale. In the darkness of space, hope became a tangible presence, carried by each person on board. Every day brought new reports from the colony world, and these messages drove the urgency of the mission. Families were still fleeing, towns were still under attack, and children were still in danger. The Black Fleet's crews absorbed every detail, understanding that time was their most precious resource. They knew that arriving too late would mean countless lives lost, and every action was calculated to ensure that would not happen. The pressure was immense, but so was their determination. Humanity had made a promise to act, and they would not fail. On Earth, people watched the preparations, in awe. Though most were unaware of the full scale of the operation, news reports and rumors hinted at something extraordinary. Ordinary citizens understood that something unprecedented was happening. Humanity, long underestimated by the rest of the galaxy, was about to make its presence felt. Support poured in from all corners of the world. Volunteers, donations, and encouragement fueled the mission. Even though the fleet moved in secrecy, the spirit of unity and purpose was visible everywhere. As the fleet approached the outskirts of the colony system, the reality of what was to come became clear. The invaders' patrols were still active, and any misstep could trigger a confrontation. Crews ran final simulations, double-checked weapon systems, and reviewed every tactical plan. Children huddled on the colony world, unaware that salvation was near. Families whispered prayers and hopes, clinging to one another in fear and anticipation. Every person on both sides of space waited, not knowing exactly what would happen, but sensing that something extraordinary was about to occur. The Black Fleet moved silently through the void, undetected by most of the galaxy. Its arrival was not meant to be announced. It was meant to intervene, to protect, and to save lives. The mission was clear: reach the colony, neutralize the threat, and ensure the safety of civilians. But beyond that, the mission carried a moral weight that no law or treaty could dictate. Humanity was acting not because it had to, but because it could not do otherwise. The quiet courage of engineers, soldiers, scientists, and volunteers had created a force that was more than technology. It was conscience made manifest. The final hours of the journey were tense. Crews moved through their stations with focused intensity, aware that every second counted. Engineers monitored propulsion systems, tacticians prepared strategies, and medics reviewed emergency procedures. Every person understood that the lives of thousands, perhaps millions, depended on their performance. Despite the pressure, there was also a sense of hope, a belief that humanity could make a difference where no one else had. In the vast emptiness of space, hope had taken form, and it moved with purpose, strength, and unwavering determination. As the fleet neared the colony, a strange calm settled over the crews. They knew that the moment of intervention was imminent. The hardships, the preparations, the long journey through space had all led to this point. Across light years, humanity was ready to step into the storm, to act where others had failed, and to stand for what was right. The Black Fleet was more than ships and crews. It was a testament to human courage, moral strength, and the refusal to remain silent in the face of injustice. The stage was set. Humanity's silent armada, moving with precision, purpose, and conscience, was about to make its presence known. The colony world, unaware of the approach, still faced danger. Families still ran through forests and caves. Children still hid under rubble, and the invaders still believed no one would challenge them. But soon everything would change. Humanity, long underestimated, was about to show that compassion, courage, and determination could reach across the stars. The third part of the story ended with tension, anticipation, and hope. The Black Fleet was almost at its destination, carrying the quiet strength of humanity across the void. Every person on board, every person who had supported them from Earth, and every innocent life on the colony world shared in a single truth. Humanity would act. They would not wait for permission. They would not be paralyzed by fear. They would intervene because it was the right thing to do. And in that moment, the galaxy had no idea what was coming. The day the fleet arrived, the skies above the colony world changed forever. What had been burning clouds of smoke and ash were suddenly filled with shapes that had never been seen before. Ships, massive and silent, appearing out of nowhere against the backdrop of stars. Families froze in the forests and on hillsides, shielding their eyes from the brightness of engines and the unfamiliar silhouettes. Children clung to parents, afraid but also sensing something different, something powerful and protective. The invaders, who had believed themselves unchallenged, looked up and stopped. For the first time, their confidence faltered. The Black Fleet moved with precision, ships aligned in perfect formations, lights blinking in a rhythm that seemed almost alive. The invaders watched from orbit, unsure what to make of this sudden appearance. They had counted on apathy, on silence, and on the assumption that no one would interfere. But now, in a matter of moments, the rules of the game had changed. Earth's fleet was not a threat to themselves only. It was a threat to the invaders' plans, to their sense of control, and to their belief that their actions would go unchallenged. On the colony world, people whispered to each other. Some believed it was a miracle, others a trick, but no one doubted that hope had arrived. Parents grabbed their children and led them to temporary shelters, telling them to stay hidden but reassuring them that help had come. Entire families huddled together, listening to the low hum of ships above, feeling for the first time that someone had not forgotten them. The fear of the past days remained, but it was now joined by a cautious sense of relief, a feeling that the tide might finally turn. Above, the invaders scrambled. Patrol ships tried to form defensive positions, but the Black Fleet's maneuvers were precise and unrelenting. Communications crackled between the invaders' vessels, confusion and fear evident in their tones. They had prepared for many things, ambushes, rebellions, counterattacks, but nothing like this. Their calculations, their plans, and their arrogance had assumed that no one with the power or the will to act would step in. The sudden arrival of the Earth fleet shattered that assumption entirely. The Black Fleet's message was simple, but unmistakable. Using transmission systems that reached all enemy ships, they broadcasted a warning. You have had your chance. Stand down. Civilians will not be harmed. There was no threat of unnecessary destruction, no declaration of war. It was a clear statement of purpose guided by morality, not politics. For the invaders, it was unexpected. Their confidence faltered further. They had believed the galaxy's silence meant consent. But now they faced a force that acted not for conquest or profit, but for justice and protection. On the ground, colonists began to see subtle movements in the sky. Small crafts descended slowly, lowering supplies, equipment, and medical aid. Soldiers, not cruel or harsh, but disciplined and organized, moved in ways that protected the civilians. Families were guided to safe zones, and children were comforted with gentle hands and calm voices. For the first time, many of the colonists realized that someone had come to fight on their side. Fear remained, but it was joined by a feeling that the impossible might be happening. They were being rescued. The invaders were unprepared for the precision of the Black Fleet. Attempts to strike back were met with defensive measures, interceptors that neutralized attacks without harming civilians. Every move was calculated to minimize casualties among the innocent, while deterring aggression. Engineers on the fleet monitored every system, ready to respond instantly. Crews operated with quiet confidence, guided by training, instinct, and an unspoken understanding that the lives of the colonists depended on them. Families on the planet watched from hiding places as small rescue ships landed near villages and settlements. Children peered out from behind trees and rocks, eyes wide in awe, as human crews guided survivors to safety. People whispered to one another in disbelief, unable to comprehend the sudden shift. The Black Fleet was not merely a military force. It was a symbol of hope, of courage, and of the possibility that even in the darkest moments, help could arrive. The invaders attempted to regroup. Larger ships maneuvered into firing positions, hoping to intimidate the fleet and maintain control. But the Black Fleet anticipated every movement, intercepting projectiles and creating safe corridors for civilians. Communication across the fleet was seamless. Every ship knew its role, every crew member knew their task, and every action was focused on protection and rescue. In the chaos of battle, humanity's discipline and compassion created a force more powerful than weapons alone. It created trust, stability, and moral authority. On Earth, those who had supported the mission from afar held their breath as updates came in. Families and volunteers tracked the progress in real time, offering moral support, supplies, and guidance. Communities celebrated quietly, understanding that humanity had taken a step that would be remembered for generations. It was not about glory or conquest. It was about doing what was right, about standing up when no one else would, and about protecting those who could not protect themselves. The colony world itself began to change as people were evacuated. Survivors moved along paths guided by the fleet's crews, carrying children, the elderly, and the injured to safety. Hospitals and temporary shelters were established in previously secure zones, where medical teams worked tirelessly to treat the wounded. People who had once thought they were alone now realized that they were not. Humanity had reached across light years to act, and the effect on morale was immediate. Fear remained, but it was tempered by the realization that someone cared, that someone had acted when the galaxy refused to. As the hours passed, the Black Fleet established a pattern of intervention. Small squads landed to secure villages. Larger ships provided orbital defense, and medical teams worked around the clock. Families began to emerge from hiding places cautiously at first. Then, with growing confidence, children began to smile, though fear lingered in their eyes. The presence of the fleet was a promise made real. No one would face this alone. Humanity had arrived not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as protectors. The invaders, realizing that their plans were collapsing, grew desperate. Communications between their ships became frantic. They attempted to fire indiscriminately, hoping to intimidate the fleet and force retreat. But the Black Fleet responded with precise defensive actions, neutralizing attacks without harming civilians. Every maneuver was calculated, every response measured, and every decision guided by a commitment to life and morality. The invaders had never faced anything like this. Opposition rooted not in hatred or conquest, but in the quiet, unyielding determination to protect the innocent. Throughout the colony world, whispers spread. People who had been terrified and alone spoke of the fleet that had arrived like a shadow over the sky. Communities began to organize, guided by human crews, sharing resources, helping the injured, and protecting one another. Families reunited when possible, and strangers became allies in the effort to survive. The presence of the fleet created not just safety, but hope, trust, and the belief that even in the darkest times, courage could prevail. The day ended with the invaders retreating, their morale shattered and their plans in ruins. The Black Fleet did not pursue unnecessarily. Their mission was not conquest, but protection. Civilians were safe for the first time in days, and families could begin the slow process of recovery. Above, the ships hovered in protective formations, a silent reassurance that humanity had arrived and would not leave until everyone was secure. The skies, once filled with fire and smoke, were now filled with quiet lights and organized motion, a testament to discipline, courage, and compassion. The colony world had survived its darkest day, and the impact of the fleet's arrival would be remembered forever. Children who had hidden in fear now saw figures who had saved them, who had risked everything without expecting anything in return. Families who had believed they were alone discovered that help could come from the most unexpected places. And across the galaxy, the story of humanity's intervention began to spread, carried by those who had witnessed it, and by the survivors who would tell their tale for years to come. The fourth part of the story closed with a sense of relief, but also anticipation. The invaders had been pushed back, civilians were being protected, and humanity had shown what could be done when conscience and courage guided action. Yet the fleet remained vigilant. The work was not over. Every ship, every crew member, and every supporter on Earth knew that the safety of the colony world depended on continued dedication. Humanity had acted, but the story was far from finished. The galaxy had been reminded that there were those who would not remain silent in the face of injustice. and that lesson would echo across the stars for a long time to come. The invaders were not willing to give up. Their pride had been wounded, their plans disrupted, and now they sought to regain control at any cost. From orbit, they launched strikes toward the colony, hoping to scare civilians and force the fleet to withdraw. Explosions erupted in the skies, shaking the ground and sending families running for cover. Fires broke out in forests, smoke rising into the sky, and the colony that had once been calm and peaceful now seemed once again on the brink of destruction. But the Black Fleet had anticipated this. Every ship, every crew, every weapon was in position. They were not just prepared to fight, they were ready to protect. Human crews moved with quiet confidence, acting not out of anger, but out of responsibility. Every strike the invaders made was met with precise interception, neutralized, without causing harm to the civilians below. Rescue ships moved through the chaos, gathering families and children, leading them to safe zones. Medics treated injuries in the open while engineers coordinated repairs on damaged structures. The efficiency of the operation was extraordinary, but it was guided by something deeper than skill. It was guided by conscience. Humanity was fighting not to conquer, but to save. Children hid in shelters, watching the chaos through small cracks and openings. Parents whispered assurances, holding them close, trying to calm their fear. For many, the sound of the fleet above was terrifying at first, but gradually, they realized that these were not enemies. Every carefully executed move, every ship that protected them instead of destroying them, sent a clear message. Help had arrived, and it was on their side. Even the smallest actions, covering a child's eyes, guiding a family through smoke, delivering food and water, built trust. Humanity's presence became more than just a shield. It became hope made real. The invaders tried to regroup, moving their remaining ships into aggressive positions. They fired blindly, hoping to hit something, anything, to regain control. But the Black Fleet responded with a precision that seemed almost impossible. Interceptors neutralized threats instantly, defensive shields protected civilians, and communication between crews was flawless. Every person knew their role. Every system worked as it should, and every move was coordinated with one goal: protect life no matter the cost. The invaders had never faced an enemy like this, one that fought with both skill and conscience, with discipline and compassion. On the ground, the evacuation continued. Families moved in small groups, led by human crews who guided them to temporary shelters and safe zones. Children clung to parents or to rescuers, their small hands held firmly as they were led through forests, fields, and makeshift pathways. Elders, who had been too slow to flee, were assisted with care, lifted into vehicles and carried by strong arms. The coordination between the fleet above and the crews on the ground was seamless. Every movement was deliberate, designed to minimize risk while maximizing safety. Amid the chaos, there were moments of quiet heroism. A medic carried an injured child across a burning field, shielding them from falling debris. An engineer climbed onto a damaged rescue vehicle to repair a broken control system while bullets whizzed past. A pilot maneuvered through enemy fire to create a protective corridor for families moving toward safety. Each act, though small in isolation, combined to form a tapestry of courage, compassion, and human determination. The invaders had underestimated humanity's willingness to risk everything to save others. The invaders' morale began to crumble. Their attacks became frantic and uncoordinated. Some ships collided with debris, others were intercepted and disabled without harm to civilians. They had expected apathy and silence, but instead they faced a force that refused to compromise its principles. Humanity had arrived not as conquerors but as protectors, and the invaders could not understand how to counter something guided by moral conviction. Every misstep they made further ensured the safety of the colonists. Families, once terrified and scattered, slowly began to see a path to safety. Children peered through trees to see rescuers approaching, their small faces lighting up with a mixture of fear and wonder. Parents whispered reassurances, their voices trembling but firm. Communities that had been fractured by panic and chaos began to come together, moving in organized groups toward designated shelters. The Black Fleet's crews had created not only safety but order, a sense of control in an environment that had seemed completely chaotic. Even as the battle raged above, moments of human connection shone through. A woman helped a neighbor carry a small child. A man shared water with another family who had fled without supplies. Children offered comfort to each other, holding hands and singing quietly to calm their fears. The presence of the fleet above allowed these acts to occur. Humanity's intervention created not just physical protection but moral and emotional support, showing that even in war, compassion could prevail. The invaders launched one last, desperate attempt to strike at the heart of the colony. Their ships fired in unison, aiming for the densest population centers. But the Black Fleet was ready. Coordinated maneuvers intercepted every strike. Shields deflected projectiles. Evacuation paths were cleared in real time. Every move demonstrated not only technological skill but also careful consideration of human life. The invaders' final attack failed, and their forces began a chaotic retreat. With the invaders in retreat, the focus shifted entirely to rescue. Human crews moved swiftly to evacuate the remaining civilians, providing food, water, and medical care along the way. Children were carried when they could not walk. Parents were assisted in moving to safe zones. Families were reunited when possible, and those who had lost homes or belongings were guided to temporary shelters. The process was painstaking, but it was thorough. Every person mattered. Every life counted. The Black Fleet had come not to dominate, but to preserve and protect. By the end of the day, the skies above the colony were quiet, except for the gentle hum of human ships hovering in protection. Fires were being controlled, the injured were being treated, and survivors were beginning to feel the first glimmers of safety in days. Families embraced one another, tears streaming down faces that had been pale with fear. Children smiled cautiously, their small hands holding on to rescuers as if they had never truly believed someone could save them. The Black Fleet had succeeded where others had failed. Above all, the impact was not just physical but moral. The colonists realized that they had been remembered, that someone had cared enough to act when no one else would. Hope, fragile but resilient, returned to the planet. Communities that had been shattered by fear began to organize, sharing resources, helping one another, and rebuilding. The presence of humanity had created more than protection. It had inspired courage, resilience, and a belief in the possibility of justice. The Black Fleet remained vigilant. Ships hovered in orbit, monitoring the skies for any further threat. Crews continued to assist on the ground, repairing infrastructure, delivering supplies, and ensuring that all civilians were safe. Even as the immediate danger passed, humanity's intervention did not end. Every decision, every action, every moment of care demonstrated a commitment to life and moral responsibility. The colonists knew that they had not been abandoned, that a force beyond their understanding had acted to save them, and that they would not face danger alone again. By nightfall, the invaders had retreated completely, their morale broken and their plans in ruins. The colony world, though scarred by fire and chaos, was alive. Families huddled together in temporary shelters, sharing stories of the day's events. Children slept in the arms of parents or rescuers, exhausted but safe. Adults whispered quiet thanks to those they could not see, understanding that the presence of the fleet above had made all the difference. Humanity had shown that courage, compassion, and moral conviction could cross the stars and change lives. The story of the day would be told for generations. Survivors would speak of the fleet that appeared when no one else would act, of crews who risked everything to protect the innocent, and of a species that refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. Across the galaxy, the tale would spread, not as a story of war, but as a story of conscience, courage, and humanity. Lives had been saved, families reunited, and hope restored. The Black Fleet had proven that intervention, guided by moral responsibility, could achieve what diplomacy and treaties often could not. The fifth part of the story ended with relief, triumph, and anticipation. The invaders had been defeated, the civilians protected, and humanity had demonstrated its willingness to act when others would not. Yet the fleet remained vigilant, ensuring that safety endured and that recovery could begin. Humanity's intervention had changed the course of history, and the colony world would remember the day when courage and conscience crossed the stars to protect life, no matter the cost. The colony world was finally quiet. Fires had been extinguished, the smoke that had darkened the skies was fading, and the ground, though scarred, was no longer under immediate threat. Families emerged from hiding places slowly, cautiously, as if testing whether the nightmare had truly ended. Children stepped out of forests and shelters, holding hands with parents or rescuers, their small eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. Many could not yet believe that someone had come to save them, that the Black Fleet, the force from across the stars, had truly acted on their behalf. Human crews remained vigilant, their ships hovering silently in protective formations above the planet. Engineers, medics, and coordinators worked tirelessly to stabilize the situation. Temporary shelters were reinforced, medical stations were stocked, and resources were carefully distributed. Even as immediate danger had passed, every member of the fleet knew their responsibility was not over. The lives they had saved needed more than protection. They needed care, guidance, and the reassurance that they were not alone. On the ground, the first signs of rebuilding began. Families cleaned what they could of their homes, salvaging supplies and belongings from debris. Children helped where they could, carrying small items or assisting in basic tasks, their curiosity slowly replacing fear. Adults worked alongside, rescuers to repair broken infrastructure, clear paths, and create spaces where communities could gather safely. It was slow work, but each small step mattered. The presence of humanity above and around them provided the courage to begin, to face a future that had seemed impossible only days before. The invaders had retreated completely, but their presence lingered in stories, memories, and scars on the land. Families whispered about the moments of fear, about narrow escapes, and about the darkness that had once surrounded them. Yet these stories were now accompanied by tales of hope and courage, the actions of the Black Fleet, the quiet discipline of human crews, and the knowledge that lives had been protected against overwhelming odds. The moral victory was clear. When humanity acted, they did so to save, to protect, and to uphold a principle that some in the galaxy had forgotten, that life was sacred. Across the colony world, communities began to organize themselves for long-term recovery. Schools were rebuilt in temporary structures, and teachers worked to restore normalcy for children who had been through unimaginable trauma. Families shared food and supplies, pooling their resources to ensure that no one was left without care. Human crews assisted in every way they could, not as rulers or masters, but as guides and protectors. Their presence encouraged collaboration, trust, and a sense of unity that had been fractured by the invaders' attacks. Meanwhile, back on Earth, news of the fleet's success spread slowly at first, then rapidly. Messages of relief, celebration, and pride filled communication channels. Citizens shared stories of the fleet's actions, of the careful planning, courage, and moral conviction that had guided every decision. Across nations, people celebrated not just the technological achievement, but the fact that humanity had acted in a way that reflected the best of its values: compassion, courage, and the willingness to do what was right even when no one else would. The Galactic Council, previously silent, could not ignore the events any longer. Reports of the fleet's actions reached every corner of the galaxy. Diplomats debated in urgent meetings, questioning why humanity had acted without permission, but also recognizing the moral clarity of their intervention. Observers noted the precision and restraint with which the Black Fleet had operated. No unnecessary destruction, no harm to civilians, just the protection and rescue of the innocent. The galaxy had witnessed something extraordinary, a species willing to cross the stars to defend those who could not defend themselves. For the colonists, the days following the fleet's arrival were filled with gratitude and reflection. Survivors spoke of the courage of the human crews, of the precise coordination that had saved lives, and of the compassion shown even in moments of chaos. Children who had once been terrified learned that safety could exist, that help could come from the most unexpected places. Adults spoke quietly of the moral strength displayed, understanding that humanity's intervention had not just changed the immediate situation, it had reshaped the way they understood what it meant to be protected, to be valued, and to be remembered. They saw fleet's crews did not linger unnecessarily. Once civilians were stabilized, medical stations established, and temporary shelters secure, ships began preparations to return. Evacuations of those who could not remain on the colony were completed carefully. Families who had lost homes were assisted in relocation, and those who could continue living on the planet were left with resources, guidance, and the reassurance of continued observation. Humanity's presence was purposeful, measured, and responsible. No one was left behind, no one forgotten. Even as the fleet moved away, the impact of their actions remained. Children played under the careful watch of rescuers and local adults, learning that the world could feel safe again. Parents worked to rebuild communities, now with hope and determination instead of fear and despair. Leaders on the colony world began to plan for the future, inspired by the example set by humanity. Strategies based not on domination but on protection, cooperation, and moral responsibility. The galaxy, too, began to react. Other civilizations who had once assumed neutrality or indifference was acceptable started to reconsider. Stories of the fleet's intervention spread through channels, forums, and communications networks. Observers debated the ethics, the courage, and the morality displayed by humanity. Many who had once underestimated Earth and its people now realized that humanity was a force defined not merely by technology or military power, but by conscience and moral courage. The lesson was clear. Strength without conscience was hollow, but action guided by compassion could change the course of events in ways that mere rules could never achieve. Back on Earth, families, volunteers, and teams who had supported the fleet celebrated quietly, but with profound pride. Engineers who had spent sleepless nights repairing ships, medics who had trained tirelessly, and coordinators who had orchestrated logistics all understood the significance of what had happened. It was not about recognition or fame. It was about knowing that lives had been saved, that hope had been restored, and that humanity had stood up when no one else would. Their work had reminded the galaxy and themselves of the power of conscience guided by action. For the colonists, the presence of humanity had transformed more than the immediate situation. It had reshaped their understanding of what it meant to be cared for, to be valued, and to survive. Communities began to rebuild not just physically but emotionally. Children played without fear, families shared stories of courage, and survivors found strength in unity. The scars of the attack remained, but they were now accompanied by the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, someone could act to protect, to save, and to restore hope. In the quiet that followed, reflections grew. Families considered the fragility of life, the importance of helping one another, and the extraordinary effort that had crossed light years to protect them. They whispered stories to children, not just about fear and loss, but about courage, conscience, and moral responsibility. These stories would be passed down for generations, shaping the culture, values, and understanding of the colony for years to come. Humanity had become more than a distant species. They had become protectors, teachers, and examples of what moral courage could achieve. The Black Fleet's journey back to Earth was solemn. Crews reflected on the risks they had taken, the lives they had saved, and the responsibilities they carried. They had acted without orders, without official sanction, but guided by a moral compass that had proven unshakable. Engineers checked every system, medics reviewed reports, and commanders ensured that lessons were learned for future missions. Each person knew that their actions had changed not just one planet, but the perception of humanity across the stars. As Earth's ships returned home, celebrations were subdued but heartfelt. Families reunited, and communities took pride in the courage and moral conviction that had driven action. Schools, workplaces, and governments recognized that humanity had made a statement, one that would resonate across generations. Strength and technology alone were not the measure of civilization. Compassion, courage, and the willingness to act, when no one else would, were equally, if not more, powerful. The galaxy, once silent, now whispered stories of Earth's intervention. Other civilizations reconsidered the rules of neutrality, the value of conscience, and the importance of protecting the innocent. Diplomats debated, scholars wrote, and citizens across distant worlds discussed the events that had unfolded. Humanity had acted not for glory or power, but for the simplest and most profound of reasons: to protect life. The lesson would not be forgotten. The final days on the colony world were filled with healing. Children learned to laugh again, families rebuilt, homes and communities organized for a future guided by the example humanity had shown. The Black Fleet, though no longer in orbit, remained a symbol, silent, powerful, and eternal in the hearts of those who had survived. Survivors knew that the galaxy could be indifferent, that threats could arise, but that courage, conscience, and compassion could burrow